Welcome back, everybody, and today we're taking a look at the imprint number 598 release of 1976's The Cassandra Crossing. So this is directed by George P. Cosmatos, who I've seen 6 other films from. There's only really been 3 other of those that I really have enjoyed, like Tombstone, Leviathan, and of Unknown Origin. So this is a disaster thriller film, clocks in at 129 minutes long, and has an all-star cast like many a disaster film from this period. So you've got likes of Sophia Loren. Unfortunately, I've only seen her in one other film, that was Operation Crossbow, but obviously she's more well known for just that one than just that one. You've also got Richard Harris, who was in Juggernaut, which is a disaster adjacent film from the same period as this. You've got Martin Sheen, who was in Lights of Apocalypse Now. O.J. Simpson, who was also in The Towering Inferno, which is another disaster film. Then you got Ava Gardner, who was in 2 other disaster films from this period, Earthquake and City on Fire. Then you got Burt Lancaster, who I've seen in 28 other films. He was in Airport, which arguably kicked off the disaster genre craze of the 1970s due to how financially and critically successful that was. And then in supporting roles, you got the likes of Lionel Stander, Anne Turkel, Ingrid Fulin, Lee Strasberg, John Philip Law, who we've talked about recently this year in Danger Diabolic. And then finally got Alida Valli, who was in Eyes Without a Face and Censor. So not just a starry cast, but also a cast that have been in many great films before this one or since. And yeah, so this is about a man who is infected with a US-made biological weapon who subsequently escapes onto a train bound for Sweden. And that train is occupied by a famous neurologist, his author ex-wife, a Holocaust survivor, the wife of a German arms dealer, the young heroin trafficker with whom she's having an affair, and the undercover Interpol agent pursuing him. But with the US government desperate to stop the spread of the virus as well as cover up its own scandal, the lives of everyone on the board the train may just well need to be sacrificed. So this is one of the many disaster films from the 70s, and although it is far from the strongest from that era, Towering Inferno and The Poseidon Adventure will always be the 2 crowning achievements of the genre from that period. And then you'd have the likes of Airport, um, Earthquake. The second Airport film is actually fairly good as well. And then you'd have this right around those last couple of films. But then you'd also have substantially worse films than this. City on Fire, for instance, with Ava Gardner, is pretty underwhelming. But then again, it was, I think, a TV film, so it wasn't going to have the best budget in the world. But then you do have big budget films from that period that were theatrical release, like Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, which is dreadful. The Swarm, which is just far too long. Um, then you got this fourth airport film, Airport Concorde 1979, which is absolutely dreadful, but does have one of the most unintentionally funny scenes in history with the flare gun scene. But that said, this is still a really, really strong enough effort that is solidly entertaining, and this is thanks to an all-star cast who are mostly effective, good cinematography, a solid score by Jerry Goldsmith, some tense scenes, overall good production value, particularly when it comes to the miniatures at the end, and a disturbingly realistic train crash. So the train crash for this is really, really rather iconic, and it's arguably the best part of the film. And that is just because, yeah, like I said, it is realistically violent, to be honest. For instance, one man gets a girder put right through him. Plenty of people get blood on them. There's fire, that people are on fire. People are thrown through glass. And then there's one part where the compartment just crushes like that, and people are sat in it. And then there's also a couple of really rather quite experimental shots where it's really people that are up close and they're just screaming. So yeah, it's that kind of thing that really does help make this a overall satisfying watch when it comes to the end. But unfortunately, it is somewhat hampered by the fact that it's trying to be several different films at once. It's trying to be like a conspiracy thriller, a disaster film. You got like the Interpol stuff with O.J. Simpson as an undercover priest. That bit doesn't really work. That just kind of drags it out and really doesn't pay off all that much at all, unfortunately. But chief among which is the fact that it's just a little bit too long. Now, I know plenty of other disaster films were around this length or longer. Towering Inferno is not a million miles off 3 hours, for instance, but I feel like the length on this does kind of negate some of the tension. It starts to feel like a train journey, and that's not something I want any film to feel like. So yeah, that's ultimately what really hampers it. But it's still ultimately a very strong 3 out of 5. So I find it hard pressed to argue it down, but I'd also find it hard pressed to probably argue it up any more than that. But still, it is a good effort, and it's really, really great to finally have this on Blu-ray. I'm a massive fan of the disaster genre, warts and all. So yeah, to finally get another one from that genre, from the arguably the golden age of that era, of the genre, should I say, is really, really fantastic. So we have the film on the disc here, the artwork on the sleeve, and then the different artwork there. Although, to be honest, neither of these are as good as the artwork that I've seen online for the film. I would have preferred that one, but still, it's solid enough. One thing that I do like about this, it does feel like a kind of like a continuation of the Crazies in some weird way, because like that film, you've got a bunch of government goons in white hazmat suits with guns that are more than willing to shoot anyone that is trying to escape quarantine or anything like that. So it does weirdly feel like a little bit of an extension to that film. But yeah, that The Crazies is arguably a slightly better film as well anyway. But still, in terms of extras, you got The Entertainer, the films of George P. Cosmatos, video essay by film journalist and author Jeremy Smith from 2026. Then you got Infectious Narratives, interview with doctoral researcher and Pandemic Pages podcast host Lucille Harrison from 2026. Behind the scenes featurette and a couple of trailers. And then the film itself is in 1080p, 178 to 1 aspect ratio, and you got LPCM 2.0 mono audio, English language soundtrack with English subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. The transfer itself looks mostly okay. There's some elements to this that it just really can't get over, and that's the rear screen projection when Martin Sheen is trying to get out onto the side of the train, or onto the roof of the train as well. And yeah, that still looks no good. And there is one brief moment of, I think it's called artifacting, that happens. I'm not sure if it's a problem with the film itself or this transfer, but there is one instance of that. But overall, the sound quality is good, and yeah, for the most part, the transfer is solid as well. So yeah, on the whole, a good release, and one that I am glad has had a release as well, because being a fan of the disaster genre, I want more of these, quite frankly. And yeah, but it is still surprising that the genre from that decade hasn't been exploited more for physical releases. The fact that we haven't, as far as the UK is concerned, had a 4K releases of the Poseidon Adventure or the Towering Inferno is still kind of a big gap, quite frankly, as far as physical collecting goes. So hopefully we get those at some point. A nice big box set of like 4K disaster films would be great. I'd say maybe putting in Towering Inferno, the Poseidon Adventure, Earthquake. There's one called I forget the name. Skyjacked. That's another one that would be a good one to put in as well. Arguably, I'd say you could probably put Juggernaut in there as well. Like I said, it is a disaster adjacent kind of film, but it still has some aspects of that kind of genre as well, with the big cast and the peril and such. So yeah, but overall, this is a decent effort and one that is well worth watching. Just don't go into it expecting it to be a fully, an action-packed effort throughout. It's only really got action in the final half hour or so, whereas obviously the likes of Towering Inferno, a good 50-60% of that is, kind of relentless in terms of its action. So yeah, but it's not quite on that level of Towering Inferno or the Poseidon Adventure, but it's not a million miles off the likes of Airport and its first sequel. So yeah, overall a good film, and like I said, well worth seeing. But nonetheless, if you have seen the Cassandra Crossing before, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.